In 1990, Goodfellas introduced Paul Vario as a quiet, controlled figure. The real man operated differently. Brooklyn, late 1970s. A small mistake in a restaurant. No scene, no noise. Hours later, 2 cars arrive. Men step out with bats and pipes. It wasn't anger, it was policy. Inside the Lucchese crime family, control came from systems, money, pressure, access. What the film removed wasn't detail, it was the mechanism behind everything. The man behind Paulie Cicero. The version most people recognize comes from Goodfellas. A quiet, measured figure who settles problems with a look. The real Paul Vario did not operate that way. He was born on July 10, 1914 in Brooklyn, New York, into a Sicilian immigrant family. His early record already showed a pattern. Disregard for rules, quick escalation, and repeated contact with the system. By his 20s, the charges were no longer minor. In 1937, he was convicted of rape and sentenced to prison. What followed wasn't a single stretch, but a cycle. Release, violation, return. Each time he walked back out, he came with a clearer understanding of how the system worked and how to move around it. That pattern mattered more than any single offense. It proved something to the people watching him. Inside networks like the Lucchese crime family, consistency is currency. Vario showed that he could absorb pressure, keep his position, and continue operating. He didn't need to appear calm to maintain authority. He needed to be predictable in one way. When lines were crossed, he responded without hesitation. Records of his career from early convictions to his later control of airport rackets and eventual prison sentences are documented in detail. This is the part that gets flattened in popular retellings. The image of a composed patriarch suggests control through restraint. The reality was built on repetition, consequence, and a history people understood without needing it explained. The structure Hollywood removed. What gets lost in the popular version is the structure around him. Paul Vario was not a lone operator or a symbolic mentor. He worked inside the Lucchese crime family, where roles were defined, profits were tracked, and decisions followed a chain of command. His position sat in the middle, close enough to leadership to carry authority, close enough to the street to control how money was made. That role meant managing systems, not just people. Hijackings didn't happen by chance. Trucks were identified in advance, routes were studied, and timing was controlled down to small details. Gambling operations required collectors, enforcers, and protection working together. Loan sharking depended on steady pressure, enough to ensure payment, but controlled to avoid unnecessary attention. Each activity was part of a larger structure, feeding into the same objective: reliable income with limited exposure. Territory mattered as much as the operations themselves. Businesses within that space, whether legal or not, understood the arrangement. Pay and everything continues without disruption. Refuse and problems begin to surface in ways that affect daily operations. This wasn't disorder. It was a system that functioned through expectation, backed by reputation and reinforced when necessary. The composed figure shown in Goodfellas suggests distance from violence. In reality, that distance was controlled. Decisions moved through him, and outcomes reached the street. That's how mid-level authority works in a structure like this. Quiet, consistent, and visible only through results that repeat often enough to become predictable. John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport, a private economy, Queens, New York. At John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport, the scale changed. Cargo moved in and out around the clock. Electronics, clothing, cash shipments, anything that could be sold, redirected, or quietly removed. Volume created opportunity, but access turned that opportunity into steady income. The airport wasn't just a transit point. It became a system that could be influenced at multiple levels. Control didn't come from a single position of authority. It moved through the layers that kept the place operating. Union influence played a central role. Shifts could slow down, speed up, or stop entirely depending on who was working and what decisions were made behind the scenes. A missing crew, a delayed load, a misplaced pallet, small disruptions on the surface, but each one carried financial consequences. Companies understood the risk. Payments weren't made out of fear alone. They were made to maintain consistency. Theft followed its own structure. Inside information identified valuable shipments before they arrived. Routes were studied. Timing was controlled. Trucks could be diverted, seals replaced, and paperwork adjusted without shutting the system down. That balance was critical. Take too much, too often, and attention builds, stay controlled, and the flow continues without interruption. What appeared to be a regulated public facility became something else beneath the surface, a controlled environment where legal operations and criminal activity overlapped. Vario's crew didn't need ownership on paper. Influence at key points was enough. Money came from both sides, protection and removal, each reinforcing the other. This is where the real difference emerges. The familiar story focuses on individuals. The reality sits in systems like this, quiet, repeatable, and built into infrastructure that never stops moving. Subscribe, because the next part changes how this ends. Violence as policy, not emotion. Stories about Paul Vario often frame violence as temper, something sudden, personal, and uncontrolled. That reading misses how it actually worked. In his world, force followed a pattern. It was measured, timed, and directed toward a purpose. It protected income, settled disputes quickly, and reinforced boundaries that others understood without needing them explained. A beating wasn't only about the person on the receiving end. It was a message delivered across the network. Workers, partners, and rivals all read it the same way. One act could prevent 10 future problems. That kind of efficiency mattered. Too much visibility brought attention, and attention brought risk. So responses were calibrated, clear enough to be remembered, controlled enough to avoid unnecessary exposure. This approach shaped behavior long before conflict reached a breaking point. Payments arrived on time, agreements held. People adjusted their actions based on what they had seen happen to others. In many cases, the expectation of consequences did more work than the consequences themselves. The system didn't rely on constant force. It relied on the certainty that force would be used when needed. That's the difference between perception and function. The familiar image suggests control through restraint alone. The reality was built on expectation. Everyone knew where the lines were, and more importantly, what happened when they were crossed. When violence did occur, it wasn't random. It was deliberate, applied with precision, then allowed to echo through the system long after the moment had passed. The personal betrayal that shifted control. Systems like this run on rules that are never written down but are understood by everyone inside them. Loyalty, territory, and personal boundaries create a sense of order. They keep relationships predictable and reduce unnecessary conflict. As long as those lines hold, decisions stay functional, focused on money, control, and stability. The moment those lines blur, the system begins to shift. While Henry Hill was serving time, that balance changed. Vario's involvement with Karen Hill crossed into territory that complicated those unwritten rules. This wasn't just a private matter between individuals. In a structure built on hierarchy and trust, personal actions don't stay contained. They move outward, affecting decisions that would otherwise follow a different path. That shift became visible when a problem emerged involving Karen. Under normal conditions, it might have been handled quietly, with minimal disruption. Instead, the response carried urgency. Protection, retaliation, and message setting all moved faster and with more weight behind them. What might have been resolved internally now required a clearer, stronger outcome, one that reinforced both authority and personal interest. This is where the system reveals its limits. It presents itself as structured and controlled, but it still depends on individuals to act, and those individuals bring their own motives into the process. Power doesn't remove personal influence, it amplifies it. It gives private decisions the ability to shape public outcomes. The composed figure often associated with Vario suggests distance from these dynamics. The reality shows the opposite. Personal choices and organizational control were closely tied. When one shifted, the other followed. And in that overlap, consequences became sharper, more deliberate, and harder to separate from the system itself. Weaponizing information. January 1979. By the end of the 1970s, problems inside the network weren't always handled with force alone. Information had become just as useful. Certain actions could be ignored for years if they didn't disrupt the balance. But once they became inconvenient, those same actions could be turned into leverage. That's what happened with Thomas DeSimone. His reputation for violence had already crossed lines that, under normal circumstances, would have drawn a response. Yet for a long time, nothing happened. The system tolerated him because he was useful. That tolerance ended the moment his actions created a personal problem for Vario. Instead of reacting directly, Vario used what already existed. He passed along information about DeSimone's past killings to the Gambino family, details that carried weight because of who the victims were. The move shifted responsibility. What had been internal suddenly became external, and the outcome was no longer in Vario's hands on paper. DeSimone was called to what he believed was a ceremony. He never walked out. The decision looked like enforcement of long-standing rules. In reality, it was timing. The same behavior that had been overlooked became the reason for his removal. This is how control worked at that level. Not every problem required visible action. Sometimes the most effective move was to redirect it, letting the system deliver the result while keeping distance from the moment it happened. The Lufthansa heist. Power without presence. December 1978. In December 1978, one of the largest cash robberies in American history took place at John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport. The Lufthansa heist wasn't just a bold operation. It showed how leadership functioned when everything was working as intended. Paul Vario wasn't on the tarmac. He didn't handle the cargo or direct the crew in real time. His role came earlier, in approval and structure. He trusted the people beneath him to plan and execute. That trust wasn't blind. It was built on years of proven results and clear expectations. The job itself relied on inside access, timing, and coordination. Shipments were identified, routines studied, and vulnerabilities mapped out in advance. When the night came, the operation moved quickly because the groundwork had already been laid. According to documented accounts of the robbery, over $5 million in cash and valuables were taken in a single operation, making it the largest cash theft in the United States at the time. What mattered most was distance. By staying removed from the scene, Vario reduced his exposure while still securing a share of the profits. That separation allowed the system to function, even when parts of it were exposed. At its peak, the structure looked efficient, but the same layers that protected it would later become the reason it couldn't hold. Collapse from within. Pressure didn't break this system all at once. It built slowly through arrests, surveillance, and the steady tightening of federal cases across New York. By 1980, that pressure reached a point where the structure could no longer absorb it quietly. Henry Hill became the turning point. Facing long prison time on drug charges and convinced he was no longer protected, he chose cooperation. That decision did more than expose individual crimes. It revealed how the system actually worked, who controlled what, how money moved, and where the weak points were. For years, insulation had protected people like Paul Vario. Orders passed through layers, and distance kept leadership away from direct risk. Hill's testimony cut through that separation. What had been hidden behind routine operations and trusted intermediaries was now documented, explained, and presented in court. The effect wasn't immediate collapse, but a chain reaction. Convictions followed. Associates were pulled into investigations. Revenue streams were disrupted. Trust, which held the system together, began to erode. Once that trust weakened, the structure lost its ability to function the way it had before. Vario was eventually convicted on fraud and extortion charges tied to his activities, including operations connected to John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport. Sentences added up, and the control he once held over his network no longer mattered inside a federal system designed to isolate and contain it. The strength of the operation had always come from coordination. Its downfall came the same way, one exposed link at a time until the entire structure could no longer hold. Bottom line, the illusion that survived. Paul Vario died on May 3, 1988, inside a federal prison in Fort Worth, Texas. 2 years later, Goodfellas gave the world Paulie Cicero, a steady, controlled presence that felt easy to understand. That version stayed. The real one didn't. What the film kept was a character. What it left out was the system, how money moved, how pressure worked, how decisions carried weight far beyond a single moment. Complexity was reduced to something familiar. A network became a face. There's a reason that version lasts. It's easier to follow a person than to confront a structure that blends into ordinary life. But once that structure is removed, so is the truth behind how it operates. If you want more like this, subscribe. Next, we look at what the film left out about the Lufthansa heist and what it reveals about the system behind it. What do we lose when power is reduced to a single figure, and who benefits when the system stays out of sight?